from the Lord from Joshua, the 24th chapter, beginning at verse number 13. Joshua, 24th chapter, beginning at verse number 13. Yeah, please stand, yes. Please stand. 13. Joshua, 24th chapter, beginning at verse number 13. It says, I have given you a land for which you did not labor, and cities which you did not build. And you dwell in them, you eat of the vineyards and olive groves which you did not plant. Now therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the God of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, my mind made up. My mind is made up. And I want to preach from the subtopic of who will you serve? The children of Israel, we know, had gone through a lot throughout this period. And I want to tell you something about God. God gives us free will to do what we want to do. And either you're going to choose to serve him, or you ain't going to serve him. You can choose to do right, or you can choose to do wrong. But God does not force anybody to do anything that they don't want to do. There used to be a time when people were coming up. We were coming up. We didn't have a choice about what we were going to do. If you were in the house on Sunday, you were going to go to church and serve the Lord. If you were in the house, you had to get up and get ready to go to Sunday school. But oftentimes now, people have too many choices. And when you leave the choice up to folks who can't really make decisions for themselves, often they'll choose to do the wrong thing. Too many parents nowadays want to negotiate when folks are staying under their roof. They want to give the kids a choice whether they're going to go to church or not. They want to give them a choice of when they get up, how they get up, or if they got to go to Sunday school. But we need to go back to the period when the choice was made for us. The children of Israel, if it had been left up to them, would have still been in Egypt, rotting in their sins. God did not intend for them to stay in bondage, but God said, I need you to move because I promised Abraham that you were going to have a promised land. And so God had to allow for them to move. But don't you know when Israel moved from Egypt, that they started walking toward the promised land, and as they got toward the promised land, it said, as Moses sent out the spies, it said these people brought back a bad report. When they bring back the report, the people began to rebel against Aaron and Moses, and they began to say, we should have just stayed in Egypt and died. They said, you let us come to this point, and now you're going to bring us here. These folks make us look like grasshoppers. They said that we need some new leaders in Israel. They said, so God got upset. God said, because you have rebelled against Aaron and Moses, he said, for every day it took them to get the report, he said, you're going to wander in the wilderness. So what should have been a short journey turned into a 40-year period of waiting. And so here it is, as they're walking in the wilderness, the Bible declares, God tells Moses, he said, those who are 20 and above are going to die in this wilderness. He said, because I need some folks who are going to be obedient to me. He said, those children of theirs who are coming up, he said, I'm going to raise them in obedience. And so sometimes God got to remove some stuff out of our lives so we can know who's in charge. And said, so as God began to do what he said he's going to do, as he begins, and Joshua takes over after Moses died, the Bible declares that as they get to the promised land, God does everything that he promised them he was going to do. And so now we at a point that God said, in this new land, I can't have you behaving the way that you acted in the old land. Some folk get some new stuff, and they don't know how to handle it. When God blesses you with something new, you can't act the same way. Some people get in the new house and you want to act the same way in the new house that you acted in your old house. You want to act the same way when you didn't have anything. But when you get something new, you got to act different. You ever got a new couch? You didn't want no kids playing on it. You didn't want no drinks on it. You didn't want nobody eating on it. You said you got to eat anything, you go over to the table. Because when you get something new, you can't handle it the same way you handle the old stuff. And so this first point is receiving the promise. So here it is that Joshua is near death. Joshua gets to the point and he said, I know I'm getting ready to die. He said, so I got to bring the whole nation together to tell them how it is they need to learn to serve the Lord. And since sometimes when people get ready to die, they got to get their house in order. He said, so you're in this new land, so the same way that you acted in Egypt, you can't act here. You got to act different. And so Moses begins to talk, Joshua begins to talk to these people. Joshua said, God has fulfilled all of the promises he made to you. And so he gathers them at Shechem. Shechem is a point in the period, it's important in Israel's period because a lot of things happen at Shechem. If you go back and as God was directing Abraham, God gets him to this point. He told him, you got to leave your land. You got to leave from where you at. And said, so Abraham comes to Shechem. And as he's at Shechem, it said, God speaks to him and he said, to your descendants, I will give this land. So long before Abraham had thought about anything, God was already working things out. And long before God has promised you, God was already working some stuff out in your favor. You didn't know what he was doing because the promise was not made to you. And because the promise wasn't made to you, sometimes it causes us to act different. And God is no less than his promise. Whatever he told you he was going to do, he's going to do it. And so in Genesis 12, he begins to talk to Abraham. He tells him that I'm going to give his land to your descendants. Watch this. Abraham didn't see the promise, but God was still going to do what he told him he would do. So the same thing he promised to your mother and your father is the same thing that he's going to do for you. I'm glad that sometimes the promise wasn't made to me, but God, whatever he said, if he says it, he's going to do it. God is not like man. Man will tell you one thing and he'll do another. But when God tells you something, God is gracious enough to do just what he said he'll do. And then the Bible goes on to tell us that at Shechem, after Jacob wrestles with the angel all night long because he's worried about this meeting with Esau. After he had tricked Esau out of his birthright, after he had done all this stuff to Esau, same with his uncle, he goes back and he's ready to meet Esau. In the Bible declares that there he begins to wrestle with the angel. And he said, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. And so God changes his name to Israel. And so after he changes his name, the Bible declares that after he meets Esau, everything is well. And then from that point, he goes to Shechem. And at Shechem is where he builds the altar. He purchases the land. He builds the altar. And he begins to rename it El Elohai, Israel, which means God, the God of Israel. So after he has an encounter with the Lord, he wanted to let everybody else know when they see the altar, this is the altar of the God of Israel. Because God had changed his name, he wanted to let everybody else know this is the place where I made a covenant with the Lord. And so somebody need to find the Shechem in your life because you're going through some hell, you're going through some bad periods, but God just wants you to get back to Shechem. And when you get back to Shechem, you can get into the presence of the Lord. The Bible declares even after Joseph died, they buried him at Shechem. And so Shechem is the place where some important things were happening in Israel, period. And so the leaders, the Bible says they gathered before the Lord. They gathered before the presence of God. And so here's the problem that some of us, we can't get together on one accord in the presence of God. We can get together, but you may be fussing. You can get together, but you may not even be thinking about God. But when you get into the presence of God, God will to get on one accord.
Yes, sir.
And so then the second point is look where you come from.
Yes, sir.
The problem with us is that a lot of us can't humble ourselves enough to remember where we came from.
That's right.
You didn't wear suits all your life.
That's right.
All your life you weren't able to buy what you wanted to buy.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes you didn't even have bologna on the table. Sometimes you had to look out the back of the house and you saw outlines. Some people were able to look up and saw the stars from the inside of the house. There were more leaks in the house than outside the house. So sometimes you got to look back at where you came from. And when you look back at where you come from, it'll humble us on the day. And so Joshua began to say, look back where you come from. Because when you look back, you'll realize that your fathers, who are your fathers, they begin to serve somebody God. And when we come from, we begin to humble us on today. He said, Israel, we come from a dysfunctional family. And a lot of us, if we look back, you'll realize that your family was dysfunctional. Some folks didn't like their cousin. Some people didn't like their uncle. Your daddy didn't like his brother. Your sisters and brothers could come together. Didn't have many family reunions because you were just dysfunctional. And when you realize you come from dysfunction, God can begin to clean up the dysfunctional stuff about you. When you realize where you come from. He said Abraham's father, he said he worshiped other gods. Some studies will tell you that Abraham's father may have been an idol maker. He would make the idol gods. And so his family, Abraham's family, worshiped other gods. But God was just telling them that God can take the bad thing. He can take the person that people said wasn't going to amount to anything. He can take the one that people said wasn't going to be nothing. He'll take you and mold you into something and mold you in what he needs you to be. And he said, so you ain't always been good. You haven't always been the best. He said, but God bless you with everything that he promised Abraham. Abraham, he told him, you got to leave your land in order to fulfill my purpose. And so sometimes we don't understand why God is telling us to move. We don't understand why God is telling us to do everything. But you got to be obedient to what God tells you to do.
That's right.
When you submit to his will, God knows what he's doing. You may not see immediate results, but God knows what he's doing.
That's right.
And so here it is. Everything that God promised, God did it.
Yes, sir.
And he said, as we look at this, if we go to the text, he said that he multiplied, he was able to multiply the descendants. Everything that he gave to Jacob and Esau, we know they were dysfunctional.
Yes, sir.
He said, but he was able to do this because he's God.
Yes, sir.
He said, even when you were in bondage, even when you were in slavery, he said, I sent Moses, I sent Aaron down to you.
Yeah.
He said, the play I played in Egypt, he said, according to what I did among them.
Yes, sir.
And he said, after this, I brought you out. And so if we begin to look back, he said, I brought you out of Egypt. Not only did I bring you out of Egypt, if you begin to look back, he not only brought him over, but he brought him over on dry land.
Yes,
and he said, I was able to do all of this even when you were over in the wilderness. He said, I brought you out of this place. I was able to cover you. I was able to protect you in the wilderness. When you didn't know, your fathers and your grandfathers didn't know where food was going to come from. I rained manna down from heaven. And I know God took care of me in my bad situation. If he could took care of my mother and my father, my grandfather and my grandmother, what can he do for me?
Yes, sir.
And so God said, I'm gracious on today.
Yes, sir.
And he just talking through Joshua to let the folks know that you got a reason to serve the Lord.
Yes, sir.
And so he said, I blessed you.
Yes.
I bless you on today. Not only did I do this, he said, even for you, I brought you to this place, to this promised land. And everybody that you encounter, he said, I destroyed them, I knocked them down, for I delivered them into your hand. He said, everything that you've been wanting, he said, I gave it to you.
Yes, sir.
And he said, not only that, he said, but then the land that you have.
Yes, sir.
He said, you even have to labor for it.
Yeah.
Cities which you didn't even have to build.
Yeah.
He said, then you dwell in them, you eat of the vineyards. And if you remember the report from Caleb and Joshua, he tells them, they went and told Moses, they bring back the fruit. And they said, this land is running with milk and honey. This land has good fruit. And so the report is what messed everybody else up, because some folks had a bad report, but they already knew what the land had for them.
That's right.
And I'm glad because God has to take us through some periods where He's just building up our faith.
That's right.
And I'm glad that He fulfilled His promise, and He fulfilled His promise to Moses by blessing them with a land that they didn't even have to labor for.
Yes, sir.
And God blesses the people.
Yes, He
Watch this. If you remember, God told Moses, He said, I'm going to let you look over into the promised land.
Yes, sir.
He said, but you won't be able to step into it.
Yeah.
He said, but then I'm going to bless the people. I'm going to still take care of the people. And so this promise that He gave to Moses, God still took care of the children of Israel.
Yes, sir.
So then this third and final point is choose who you'll serve.
Yes.
So as we look at verse number 14, Joshua switches from telling them what God has said, and he starts giving them a command. He said, now therefore, fear the Lord. He said, serve Him in sincerity and in truth. And often when we look back at what God has done, it'll cause us to be sincere. It calls us to want to serve God. Because it's not something that somebody had to tell you what God did. But when He done it for you, you experience it for yourself, you ought to want to serve Him. I don't know about you. I know God has been good to me, and so I don't want nobody have to push or prime me, but I want to serve God because I've seen what He done for me. And so He said, serve Him in sincerity and in truth. He said, put away the gods which your fathers served. He said, on the other side of the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And so Joshua begins to tell them that God has been gracious enough to us.
Yes, sir.
He said that the choice ought to be clear.
Yes, sir.
The choice ought to be clear to somebody on today. Some people had a choice whether they wanted to come to church or they wanted to watch the football game. You got some choices you got to make. Somebody had a choice whether they wanted to go wash their car or if they wanted to come to church. Somebody had a choice of whether they're going to go to the coast and eat crab legs or they're going to come to church. Some people chose the latter, but I choose that I'm going to serve the Lord. God gives us all choices, and serving God is not something that we can pick up and put down, but it's something that we do daily. Sometimes you got to make some sacrifices for God. It's not easy sometimes having to choose between going on dates. It's not easy sometimes choosing between your children and God, but God requires us that we have to serve Him daily. Sometimes we want to rush out the house without praying. We want to rush out the house without picking up our Bible. But sometimes we're just tired coming in from work. But you got to choose to serve the Lord. Somebody is watching you to figure out what you're going to do. And it's up to you to figure out if you're going to serve Him on today. So He begins to say, He said, all the God that your father served, He said, put those gods away. And what you got to know about what God did when He blessed them with the promised land, He didn't take all of the enemies from around them. So there was still some enemies, there was still some influences that were around them. And sometimes, even when you get saved, there's still going to be some influences around you. But you got to make the choice. You got to make the choice what you're going to do, whether you're going to serve Him or not. Your friend's going to say, let's go to this party. People are going to say, well, man, why you got to go to church on Wednesday and on Sunday? But you got to make it up in your mind. It's not up to them. They don't have a heaven or hell to put you in. But this day I choose to serve the Lord. And so Joshua begins to tell them, he said, if it seems evil to anybody that's here to serve the Lord, he said, you choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. He said, either you're going to serve the gods over from Egypt or the other side of the river, or you're going to serve the gods of this land. He said, the choice is up to you. The choice is clear on today. And he said, but then I choose to serve the Lord. So here it is. So as Joshua said, Joshua not only makes it for himself, he said, but as for me and my house, he said, we will serve the Lord. And often when you are over your house, wherever you say go, and so there's some folks in your house who don't want to serve, so sometimes you got to move some folks out the way. Because as the leader, you got to serve and set the example about what's going to happen. And this choice that Joshua made, he said, I didn't choose to start serving them now. He said, but I've been serving them even in the past. And so Joshua had lived his life in commitment to God. And so Joshua already knew the reason why he was serving the Lord. Joshua understood that God took care of him even when he was walking with Moses. And he said, God can take care of me. Back then, he said that I choose to continue to serve him right now. And so Joshua had already made up his mind. He said, I don't care what everybody else decided to do. Whatever you decide to do is your decision. He said, but my mind is already made up. My mind is already fixed. My mind is made up. I choose to serve the Lord. And so then as Joshua said this, Israel said, if you're going to serve the Lord, he said, then we choose to serve the Lord. Is there anybody here that already got a made up mind? When you go to work on tomorrow, you choose to serve the Lord. When you go home, you choose to serve the Lord. I don't know about you, but it may be unpopular sometimes, but I choose to serve the Lord. Folks won't agree with me. Some people are going to say, well, you can just take a little hit of this, but I choose to serve the Lord. And why am I serving the Lord? Because God has been good to me. Is there anybody here on today that has your mind made up? And I know about you, but God has been too good to me. Took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself. And so that's the reason why I decide that I'm going to serve the Lord. I decide to serve him on Monday through Saturday. And even when I get to Sunday, I'm going to continue to serve him. And because God has been good to me, I choose to serve him. My mind has been made up long before I got to Mountain Roads. I'm going to serve the Lord. Is there anybody here on today that know that God has done something for you? I don't know what he done for you, but I know he did for me. He was able to take care of me on today. Paid my bill when I didn't know where money was going to come from. Kept me on today for danger seen and unseen. Kept me through car accidents. Kept me through surgery. And that's why I choose to serve the Lord. Took care of me when people died. Took care of me when I didn't know where else to turn. I'm glad on today that God has been good to me. And because God has been good to me, I choose to be committed to him on today. Joshua said, Israel, you got a choice because you got a new house. You got to learn what you're going to do in it on today. I can't bring the old stuff into this new land. What God has promised for me, I can't bring my old baggage. I can't bring my old face. But this day I choose to serve him on today. Why am I serving? Because God has been good to me. He was good to my grandmother. He was good to great-grandmother. Even when they were in the field, God was still good to him. And that's why I choose to serve him. I choose to serve him because one Friday on a cross called Calvary, they nailed him in his hand. They nailed him in his feet. Beat him all across his back. Jesus hung his head. Then he died. And when he died, they took him down to an old borrowed tomb. When he laid down that first day, he laid down that second day. But I'm glad that's not how the story ends. But he saw me coming down the line. He saw you coming down the line. The Bible declares he got up early on that third day morning with all power in his hand. And that's why I serve him, because God has continued to be good to me. God took care of me. I found favor when I didn't deserve it. I found favor even when I was good. But God has been so gracious enough to me. So my mind is already made up. My mind is fixed. My heart has been fixed on today. I don't need much push. I don't need much rhyming. Because I'm going to choose to serve the Lord. And that's all God is requiring of us. Some people have easy choices to make. And they'll choose to make a hard decision. Some folks are lost because they've been choosing to serve everything else but God. People wondering why they're catching hell is because you ain't serving God. But when you get back into his presence, you'll never be the same again. So in this year, you ought to make the choice. You ought to make the decision. I ain't bringing the old stuff with me. I ain't bringing my old ways. I ain't bringing the attitude. I can't. Some friends ain't gonna be able to come with me. Some folks ain't gonna be able to come with me, because if you ain't choosing to serve the God that I serve, I can't be with you. He said, but as for me and my house, we're gonna serve the Lord. And that's all he's requiring. Sometimes you got to make a decision for the folks that's in your house.
Yes, sir.
Some of the folks who are connected to you, you got to make the choice. Because some folks are going to choose to stray away. They're going to choose to go with the world. But as for me,
Yes, sir.
I made up my mind I'm going to serve the Lord. The songwriter declares that I promise him that I
Yes, sir.
will serve him until I die.
Yes.
As I'm fighting on the battlefield for the Lord.
Yes.
It's not an easy choice sometimes.
Yes, sir.
People get drugs put in front of you, you get money put in front of you, you get women, men put in front of you, and you want to go and serve that.
Yeah.
But sometimes you got to make the choice
Yes, sir.
to serve the Lord. Just like the prodigal son, when it said that he chose to live how he wanted to live, it said, but then he came to himself
Yes, sir.
and said, why am I sitting out here in this hog field?
Yes, sir.
And he said, when I can be at my father's house, where everything is already cared for.
Yes, sir.
He said, I go back as a higher servant than to sit out here. People would rather sit in their midst
Yes, sir.
than to choose to serve God.
Yes, sir.
God has already set it out for us. But it's our decision to choose who we're going to serve.
Yes.
God has everything that we ever want or we ever need.
Yes.
He's blessed us with abundance, but some folks still go choose to go and serve the devil. But God is making the choice. God told Israel, he said, I gave you everything that you wanted.
Yes, sir.
I took care of you in Egypt. I took care of you in the wilderness. He said, even when you got to the promised land, I promised you that everywhere that your sole of your foot touched, it was already yours.
Yes, sir.
So the choice ought to be easy. The decision already be made. Who you going to serve? So I choose today.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to serve the Lord. And the reason why I have everything that I want is because I serve someone that'll give me everything.
Yes.
If I just ask for it, he'll give it to me.
Yes.
And that's why I choose to serve him. Because he's been good to me. So somebody look at your neighbor and say, neighbor,
Neighbor.
my mind is made up.
My mind is made up.
We're going to serve the Lord. We're going to serve the Lord. Whatever you decide to do is your business. But for me, when I go to school, when I go home, I'm going to choose. I'm choosing intentionally to serve the Lord. Nobody ain't got to make you be intentional. Somebody need to change on today. You're in a messed up condition because you choosing to serve who you want to serve. But just serve the Lord. We're standing on today.